just to recapitulate. Hmm? I'm not able to. I hope I am audible now. Okay, thank you. So maybe I wasn't audible before. So I am wishing you once again God's blessing and shalom to everyone. Yes, and we continue from where we stopped last week. Just to recapitulate what we saw in the previous week. The last part of previous week, I will share a part of the screen. If you remember, we spoke about the three scenes in chapter 5. Each scene begins with a verb of action. So before we enter into the text of chapter 6, let's go with the theme of the day. We will, as usual, we'll read from a part of the verse of the chapter that is assigned for us today. Okay, we begin with the Exodus chapter 5, chapters 6. Exodus 5 is the fifth day of our class, fifth class. Chapter 6, verse 7. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. This is the theme that will color the day's class. We will be beginning with the introduction to the plagues, and all these plagues will take into consideration the great truth of the covenant, which is highlighted in verse 7, chapter 6. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. This is part of their credo, the I believe, the faith of the people of Israel. Okay, just to recapitulate, we are speaking with the two root experiences of Israel. I'll repeat this again and again because I think all of us should get it into our heart, these two root experiences: Exodus from Egypt and the revelation at Mount Sinai. First 15 chapters speak of the Exodus from Egypt, and the rest up to chapter 40 speak about the revelation at Mount Sinai. And these two are inseparable. First is God's action to liberate a band of slaves from bondage, and the second to make them a community bound in covenant with a liberating God. And that's the part of the covenant that we read at the introduction to today's class. Just to revise the 6 scenes, each scene beginning with a verb of action. The first scene that we saw in chapter 5, verse 1, the report that Moses and Aaron went. This is the first part of the revelation about God, who is Yahweh. And the message from God: thus says the Lord, let my people go. Let my people go. The underlying principle of Exodus: let my people go. The second scene has Pharaoh speaking to the Egyptian taskmasters and the Hebrew supervisors. The second scene. The third scene begins with the taskmaster's aggression in implementing the royal order. The scene begins with the word they went out. They went out. The result is that the people are forced to look for straw while the supervisors are flogged because the people cannot produce. The fourth scene, the taskmasters, the Hebrew supervisors before Pharaoh. The Hebrew taskmasters are there before Pharaoh. Um, the outcome of the meeting is less than what it was hoped for. The quota must remain the same, but no straw would be provided. The fifth scene focuses on the supervisors and Moses and Aaron. As usual, the verb of action whereby the supervisors bump into the two leaders. Um, and these two leaders are the recipients of a curse. The Lord looked upon you and judged. That's what the supervisors told Moses and Aaron. And sixth scene and the final scene as Moses appealing to Yahweh. The scene depicts a discouraged Moses, a typical Moses who will not cease to badger Yahweh with his complaints. Now we know the reason why Moses was reluctant to take up the office we saw in the previous classes. He tried his level best to escape from the mission that Yahweh wanted to entrust with Moses. Okay, we move to chapter 6, the commissioning or recommissioning of Moses. This is a doublet. J tradition and E tradition gave us the account of the call of Moses in chapters 3 and 4. That is why I have put recommission, in bracket. For the P writer, this is the commissioning, not recommissioning. But for our reader, this is the recommissioning because we have seen already in chapter 3 and 4 the narrative from J and E writer. The J and E writer, E tradition, are descriptive. Descriptive. They make the whole story with a lot of suspense, with magical and exotic elements, like the rod of Aaron. Oh, sorry, earlier it was Moses. Okay, the rod of Moses, like the Egyptian magicians turning into snake. While P narrative in chapter 6 is prescriptive. Prescriptive. You know, the priestly writer is famous for prescription. You shall do this, you shall not do that. We hear that from the priestly exhortations, you know. even the church laws, the canon law, or the Ten Commandments. You shall do, you shall not do that. So prescriptive. Um, Now, what we have in chapter 6, the call of Moses, is the result of the response of the lament of people, which is from the key writer, chapter 2, 23 to 25. So, this call of Moses is an answer to the plea, the lamentation of the people of Israel who were under the yoke of the Egyptians. So everything typical of the call, just like the call of any prophet, for example, would be seen in this chapter. Let me also um, inform you that the pattern that is followed with regard to the call of Moses is same as in chapter 3 and 4. The same pattern. Um, Verse 5, for example, divine response to prayer. Verse 6 to 8, God's promise to save. Verse 9 to 11, the commission. Moses is commissioned. Objection by Moses in verse 12. Chapter 7, 1 to 5, objection overruled, or overcoming the objection. I have not put these into the slides because the similar pattern was discussed in the call narrative of J. in chapter 3 and 4. So, but the same pattern is followed in P. Writer as well. Okay, now what is important here, which I would like to highlight very much, is the theme of continuity and discontinuity. The theme of continuity and discontinuity. What do I mean by this? First of all, the God who spoke to Moses is the same God who appeared to the patriarchs. I repeat, the God who spoke to Moses is the very same God who had appeared to the patriarchs. That is why the repeated expression, God of your father Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So it's the same God, continuity. And just like this God was present to them several centuries earlier, 400 years earlier, the same God will be present to Moses and Aaron and to the people of Israel. What is different? What is the difference? Yes, the personal name of God was not revealed to the patriarchs. The personal name is revealed now to Moses and the people of Israel 400 years after they came down to the land of Egypt. It is in chapter 6, verse 2, that God reveals his name. I will read from the text of New Jerusalem Bible. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Yahweh. New Jerusalem Bible writes with the vowels Yahweh. Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. I am the Lord, or I am Yahweh. what was the name of God that was revealed or that was understood by the patriarchs? The most common name that we have seen several times when we did the pilgrimage through Genesis was the name El Shaddai. El Shaddai. There are a number of passages in Genesis. Okay, I've just given one more example from Ezekiel. This El Shaddai is translated in the English text today as God the Almighty, God of the mountain, God of the step. There are a few more. Let's not discuss them now. Okay, just this is a comment. God of the Almighty or God Most High. What is this? What is the origin of this El Shaddai? It is a name came long before Moses um, encountered God. Most probably, it came with the patriarchs from Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, they worshipped several gods. Among the Sumerians, the most popular was the moon god. So I once mentioned that Abraham may have been a moon worshipper. The name El Shaddai most probably came from Mesopotamia. And at the same time, same period, there were other names for God that are used by Genesis or the other parts of the Bible. For example, El Olam, translated as God everlasting, or God, or El Elyon. El is the name for God, no? Short form for Elohim. El Olam, El Elyon, El Berith in Judges. Berith is covenant, God the covenant. So these were the names already existing or pre-existed the name of Yahweh. The Septuagint or the Greek translation of El Shaddai is Pantokrator. Pantokrator means ruler of all. That is translated in the Vulgate or the Latin translation, Latin versions as omnipotence. And the Catholic Bibles, early Catholic Bibles, which were a translation from Vulgate or Latin versions, used Almighty as the translation for El Shaddai, through Pantocrator, through omnipotence, and coming finally to English as Almighty. That is the genesis of Almighty or God Most High in the English translation. Okay, from El Shaddai to Pantocrator Greek to omnipotence in Latin and to Almighty in English. So this is what I want to say. There is continuity and discontinuity. Continuity, it's the same God who spoke to Moses, spoke to the patriarchs, is the one speaking to Moses now. Discontinuity is that the name Yahweh was never revealed to the patriarchs. It is now revealed to Moses. So that is what I want to say about continuity and discontinuity. In this chapter, chapter 6, the beginning of chapter 6, the central theme is what I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. Ani Adonai, I am Yahweh. It is so important. Repeatedly, this is used 4 times in chapter 6, verse 2, 6, verse 7, and verse 8. What does it here mean in the context and also etymologically? I am here and present to you, and I am acting. I am present. I am present to you, and I am acting. A formula that demands responsive action also from Israel. So God will act, Israel also will have to respond. I am Yahweh. And God is going to perform 3 things. First, liberation from slavery. Second, the covenant. I shall take you as my people, and I shall be your God. And thirdly, the promise of the promised land. The promise of the promised land. So these are the 3 things that summarize the first part of chapter 6. When we speak of Yahweh, or God as Yahweh, God as Yahweh, we are thinking of a God who is here and now, God who is present, and a God who acts in the life of Israel. And the 3 things, they are going to be liberated from slavery. Secondly, this is a God of the covenant. God will make the people as his own, and he will be a God. And third is the movement. As they come out of the slavery, they will be led into the promised land, the promise of the promised land. The covenant that God is going to make with Israel is uh, is binding on both God and Israel. It's not a one-way affair. God, as the God of Israel, who has selected them, who has made the people of Israel as his own, and their responsibility, the responsibility of Israel, is to acknowledge the sovereignty, which will entail certain type of relationship. God is going to act miraculously on their behalf. The liberation will be miraculous, that their entry into the promised land will also be miraculous. Now, Yahweh asked Moses in the beginning of chapter 6 to tell the people that their groaning had reached Yahweh and he would deliver them from bondage. So the call of Moses is a response to the groaning of the people of Israel. So their groaning has reached God, and God is going to take them out from bondage. Unfortunately, the response of the people is negative. They do not trust Moses. Unfortunately, they do not trust. Look at verse 9, chapter 6, 9. Moses told this to the Israelites, all that the Lord had commanded, but they would not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and their cruel slavery. So their slavery had, in a way, made them so dispirited, so dispirited that they did not even want to, they were not in a position to understand the implication of what God told them. Yeah, this is very unfortunate. Um, we come to the genealogy of Moses and Aaron, starting from verse 14, going to the end of the chapter, the genealogy of Moses and Aaron. Now, I think it is a common experience, at least for most of us. The genealogies are boring, and we tend to skip them. When we read the first gospel according to Matthew, when we open the pages of the gospel, the so-called infancy narrative, and that first pages are those pages that people read least. It starts saying an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. Then from verse 2, you find a series of names, so boring names. When these names are read on the beginning of the second phase of Advent, in proximate um, preparation for Christmas, when this genealogy is read in the church, the gospel according to Matthew, many people try to close their ears, or they would tend to distract themselves because these names are so strange. So genealogies, unfortunately, are not taken seriously by the modern readers. There is a reason. There must be a reason why we find repeated genealogies. If there is no reason, Bible will spend. Bible will not spend a lot of energy in retaining number of genealogies. Actually, the genealogies are selective. They are, we call them a selective genealogy. Just to share with you the example from Matthew's Gospel. The whole history of Israel from Abraham to Jesus, let's put it as like a 2000 years. Matthew has divided them into three segments: from Abraham to David, David to deportation to Babylon, and deportation to Babylon to birth of Jesus. Three perfect segments according to Matthew. But there is a selective genealogy because from Abraham to David, there is a duration of 1,000 years. The first segment will be 1,000. Second segment, 1,000 to 1,000 BC, David, to 587 BC, the destruction of Jerusalem or Babylonian captivity. So they are not, let's say, accurate genealogies, but selective genealogy. Now, in this chapter 6, the purpose of the genealogy of Aaron and Moses is to trace the priestly lineage from Levi, the third son of Jacob, to Aaron, and through Aaron's third son, Eleazar, to Phinehas. In the Numbers, book of Numbers, chapter 3, this is going to be very important. So, to um, already introduce us to the genealogy, to the lineage of Aaron, we have this genealogy in chapter 6. And it's very important in the history of Israel that the priesthood passes through Aaron and through his third son, Eleazar. If you look at the text in chapter 6, verse 20, Amram married Jochebed, his father's sister, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. This text does not speak about Miriam, the sister. Later, Miriam's name will come. Then the names of Ishar are given there. Ishar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri. Other names are there. Aaron married Elisheba. And see the number of children. Um, you will in the genealogy also later we will see that the first two sons of Aaron were not accepted into the priesthood for various reasons that will be discussed later in the Bible. Okay, so the purpose of this genealogy is to trace the priestly lineage of Aaron from Levi and from Aaron to his third son Eleazar to Phinehas, as we see in Numbers, as we read in Numbers chapter 3. The genealogy of Moses and Aaron will concentrate on the third son of Leah, and not after just a passing reference to the eldest and the second, Reuben and Simeon. So according to this list, it's only just a fourth generation that Moses from Jacob. Okay, just fourth generation, which is very, very unlikely. So 400 years have passed after Jacob came to Egypt. So this is not to be taken literally. The purpose is important. The purpose in this chapter 6, which is coming from the priestly tradition, is to show that the great leaders of the Exodus event come from the priestly class, from the family of Levi. Originally, the term Levite was a secular name, simply meaning a member of the tribe of Levi. It is much later. Levite had a mission. It denoted a type of a task, a, a work to be performed. So originally, it simply meant um, Levite means a member of the tribe of Levi. Later, it had a loaded significance. Then, over the years, in the long evolution of the long process, it came to mean certain task. If you go through chapter 28 of Exodus, which is a long chapter, the work of the Levite is cultic. They are asked to prepare vestments and prepare items for the sanctuary and the tabernacle and the dress of the priest. Technically, they are actually menial cultic tasks. Later, by emphasizing the role of Aaron, the priestly writer intends to establish a claim for the legitimacy of the group of priests who control the temple in Jerusalem. In the history of Israel, the struggle to claim the legitimacy and the supremacy of the governance of the temple in Jerusalem was long standing. The struggle went on and on and on. Even at the time of Jesus, when we read from external sources, and there are also internal evidences in the Gospels to show the struggle for supremacy in the temple in Jerusalem. The genealogy provides identity and undergird the status of the descendants of Aaron. Aaron is presented as the model high priest. Later on, all the high priests will trace their origin back to Aaron. Even when we read in the book of Leviticus about the day of atonement, it is Aaron who will perform the role. And later on, in the history of Israel, every year, once every year, precisely on the day of atonement, which is called in Hebrew as Yom Kippur, only the high priest enters the Holy of Holies. And only on that day he enters, and nobody else has the right to enter the Holy of Holies. So the high priest traces his origin back to Aaron and the legitimacy of entering the Holy of Holies. The and the priest, the high priest, will descend through Eleazar, third son, and Phinehas, and not through Korites. And Korah is mentioned in chapter 6. And in book of Numbers, there is a struggle going on between Aaron and the Korites. And during the struggle, they will rebel against the authority of Moses and Aaron. And the text will say, God punished this rebellion. He put down the rebellion by the death of all those who rebelled against Moses and Aaron. Okay, let's get back to the story. In the book of Psalms and the Chronicles, the um, the occupation of Levite is temple singers. The Levites are temple singers. Their occupation is to be singers in the temple. Okay, in the in chapter 6, 13, there was I want to go back to just one reference in chapter 6, verse 13. Sorry, I just made a mistake. We in this section we also find the reassurance given by God to Moses, and that reassurance was interrupted by the genealogy by the priestly writer. So that will be taken up again, the reassurance that Moses will be given the power, will be given the power to lead the so-called liberation. In fact, Moses will be given a kind of a quasi divine function, quasi divine function, and the word in the Hebrew text, it will be used as Elohim, that he will be a God, Elohim, um, because it comes in the context of a repeated objection by Moses. For example, chapter 6, verse 10, verse 12, Moses says, Israelites have not listened to me. Then how will Pharaoh will listen to me because I am a poor speaker? So repeatedly you find God reassuring Moses. Okay, that is important in this chapter. Okay. And even the chapter 6 concludes with an objection by Moses. Since I am a poor speaker, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And chapter 7 begins like this. See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. Elohim. Elohim. That does not mean that this Elohim is Yahweh God. And in English, we put it as a small e, Elohim. So, there are other cases where others are given this title, Elohim. Um, chapter 7, in the reassurance, after entrusting the task to Moses, God says, You shall speak all that I command you, verse 2. And your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his land. Before I come to the role of Aaron, I would like to highlight one aspect here. In this chapter 7, one who is leading the Exodus is not Moses. It's Yahweh. Yahweh alone will actually lead Israel out of Egypt. Moses is only an instrument. Only an instrument. Look at verse 4. Yahweh says, I will lay my hand upon Egypt. I will bring my people, the Israelites. Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. See, God's role. The one God who is Yahweh should be known not just to Israel alone, but to Egyptians as well. That is the purpose. That is why, so that the Egyptians may learn that I am the Lord. Now, I would like to highlight this aspect. Because it is coming from the priestly writer, the priestly writer wants to highlight the role of Aaron the priest. Looks as though the prominence is given to Aaron the priest rather than Moses the prophet. And this section ends by mentioning the advanced years of Moses and Aaron. They begin their ministry, their task, when they are, according to our calculation, advanced years. Like Aaron was 83 years old and Moses 80 years old. And let's not calculate with our own age. Moses is most mature at this time, 80 years old. 40 plus 40. 40 is the ideal number, and double 40 is more greater than the ideal, a symbol of maturity. And a question is asked: is it this also to signal the strength that God gives to Moses at this so-called advanced age? Because Deuteronomy chapter 34, Deuteronomy concludes with the statement that Moses was still virile and strong at the age of 120. He did not, Bible does not say that he died of old age or he died because he was exhausted, because he died of illness. No, Moses was still strong and robust. Um, we come to the plagues, introduction to the plagues. This is going to be a long session. It will need a lot of listening through the heart, not just through the ears, because the 10 plagues are so important in the history of Israel that they come in different narratives. For example, in Psalms like 78 and Psalm 105, there are reference to these plagues in other parts of the Bible. They may not call them as plagues. The official name would be signs and wonders. This section goes from chapter 7, verse 8 to chapter 11. So it's a major section in this first part of the account of Exodus. We are going to see the introduction to the plagues, verse 8 to 13. But before that, a few preliminaries. First, there is a competition between two parties. Who are the two competitive parties? Moses and Aaron on one side, Egyptian magicians on the other side. Or at times, it will be Yahweh, Moses, and Aaron on one side, Pharaoh and the magicians on the other side. So two warring factions. Two warring factions. So for P, for the priestly writer, the first meeting with the Pharaoh demonstrates Yahweh's power before Pharaoh. Because what we are going to see in chapter 7 is the first time that Moses is encountering Pharaoh, which we saw according to J writer already in chapter 5 at the beginning of chapter 6. Okay, for the P writer, this is the first time that Moses is encountering Pharaoh. That is why in this chapter there is some difference, a change of roles. So Aaron is the chief actor. Aaron is the chief actor, and his rod is important, and not the rod of Moses. Okay, please pay attention to that. Now, a question was raised in the previous class last week. Someone of you asked me if there were two rods, the staff of God, we mentioned the staff of God because the staff was given by God to Moses, and Aaron also had. So they asked me, someone asked me if they had both, or rather two separate rod staff. I was not able to convincingly give an answer at that time. Now in this chapter, it is quite clear that they were or taking these two contexts together. Both have their staff, the rod. Okay. Now, Aaron is the chief actor because the priestly writer wants to give importance to Aaron, and it is Aaron's rod that is turned into a snake. Those of you remember reading chapter 5, yeah, the rod of Moses turned into snake when he was competing with the Egyptian magicians. Just like the Egyptian magicians were able to turn the rod into a snake, Moses performed. Now in chapter 7, it is the rod of Aaron that is turned into a snake, and that rod will eat up the snake of the magicians of Egypt. Okay. Now, what about the role of Pharaoh? I mentioned already that there is a great scene of great contest between Yahweh and Pharaoh, or Moses, Aaron one side, Pharaoh and the magicians on the other side. In the J account in chapter 5, Pharaoh showed his unwillingness to let Israel go. And so tension is raised up in chapter 7, and that will gradually take us to a greater struggle leading to its climax in chapter 10, when Moses tells Pharaoh, I, oh sorry, I will not see your face again. There is a break up point, break a point. I will not see your face again. So that is no more reconciliation. Yahweh is going to work the last dramatic event. So from chapter 7, you have to read the text like a drama. In a series of episodes, the narrator is going to build up intense dramatic suspense. Each visit to Pharaoh accentuates the crisis, leading up to crisis after crisis. Each plague increases the gravity of the situation and it builds up. Finally, Pharaoh's stubborn hold on the Hebrews breaks. And at that moment of weakness, Pharaoh permits the people of Israel to leave, but he repents. He changes his mind soon after that. He sends out his warriors in a hot pursuit. Israelites are saved in time miraculously, whereas those who pursue are utterly defeated and drowned in the waters of the sea. And that is the conclusion to the first part. So all that we are going to see up to chapter 15 is summarized in these few phrases. At the moment of weakness, Pharaoh lets the people go. He repents. He sends the warriors to pursue and bring the people back. And the sea is going to be very, very important in the history of Israel. Throughout, they will recall that event at the sea. They crossed the sea and saved from the clutches of Pharaoh. From the beginning to the end, there is a mention that contest between two powerful opposing groups. Stubborn Pharaoh and his crafty magicians on the other side, on the one side, Yahweh and his representative Moses and Aaron on the other. Mind you, Yahweh is not contesting with the gods of Egypt. This is very important because Egyptians considered Pharaoh as God, but not the Bible, not the Jews, not the Hebrews. Yahweh is not contesting with the gods of Egypt. No, he is contesting just a human being characterized by political ambition, and that is Ramses II. So the biblical narrator arranges all the events in such a way that Yahweh is in perfect control, Nothing happens by chance. God guides every event meticulously, and He will gradually and definitely lead to a happy conclusion. God knows perfectly well the beginning as well as the end of the story. Um, he could have, God could have struck Pharaoh and smitten him right at the very beginning, just at the first plague. God could have taken complete control, but he would not do that. Why? The reasons are explained in the latter part of this story. A few preliminaries that I would like to highlight. Okay. Although we speak of 10 plagues, we have heard it often repeated in our catechism classes and other parts of our tradition. 10 plagues, we are accustomed to be speaking of 10 plagues. These 10 plagues are rendered in different ways in the Bible. I refer to two Psalms. Psalm 78 has only 6. Sometimes we can find out 7 plagues. Psalm 105 enumerates 7 plagues, but those 7 plagues are narrated differently. They are kept in different order. The order is different in Psalm 105. So just in the same book of Psalms, the order and the numbers are different. So how do we explain the diversity and the contradictions, apparent contradictions, or there are doublets? Exodus chapter 10, verse 2 implies that these traditions were transmitted orally. It's not that immediately after the events took place, Moses wrote down a kind of a journalistic account of what took place. No, they were transmitted orally, and it has been handed down centuries after centuries. Therefore, some variation is to be expected because there is a process of transmission. So the combination of both oral and written traditions gives us the variation in Psalm 78, Psalm 105, and even within the book of Exodus. Let me take you back to the fundamental principle. The study of the Bible, when we speak about inspiration and biblical truth, we should know that scriptural or biblical truth lies not in its specific historic detail as much as its moral truth. I refer to 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16. I will show the screen, the coming slide. Now, historical detail are not important. as much as its moral truth. I'm not saying they are not important, that these are not just folklores. No. But when we pass the message from one to the other, there is the possibility of change in detail. The numbers may vary, but the moral truth is that is what is important. Let's look at the text of 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. It would be wonderful if we can learn by heart. This is the foundation for inspiration. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. See, the Saint Paul uses the term breathing out, breathing out. So every text of the Bible contains the breath. The word inspiration comes from the Latin word inspirare, means to breathe. So every text contains the breath of God. That does not mean that is really the word spoken by God. No, it is the word of the human author. That's what we call the what Vatican II says, the verbum, God's word in human words. God's word in human words. You are listening to me in English. You are using the NRSV or New Jerusalem or New American Bible, which is in English. God did not speak to the authors in English. God did not inspire the authors in English, but the author, the human author, wrote down in the language that he knew. So that is, we call it the double authorship. Okay? God's word in human words. So all scripture is breathed out by God. And what is the scope? What is the purpose? Profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. I know I am at this point uh, may sound bit theoretical, maybe even a bit abstract, but this is very important to understand the text of the Bible. Otherwise, the doublets, the inconsistencies um, will not be tackled properly, cannot be explained properly. Especially, we find different variations of 10 plagues within the text of Exodus and the rest of the books of the Bible. Okay, so please keep this in mind. There is a combination of different layers of oral tradition and written tradition. Then Israel remembered the great deeds of Yahweh in connection with her deliverance, for they were brought out with great terror, with signs and wonders. My friends, those of you who are listening to me, signs and wonders. Bible uses the word signs and wonders. They do not use plagues. For Deuteronomy, Psalms, etc., they use signs and wonders. Whatever God has done are signs and wonders. They are signs indicating that Yahweh is God. Yahweh is in absolute control. These 10 plagues have been built up from different sources. That is why you might find different variations of this. There is a combination of three traditions: J, E, and P. There are 8 plagues are attributed to J and E sources, while P has added 2 others. So in the basic J and E account, Moses asks Pharaoh to let the people go. Pharaoh refuses. The plague is caused by Moses. Pharaoh begs him to stop this plague so that and the people can go. But then Pharaoh hardens the heart again. This is a pattern. The pattern given to us by J writer and E writer together. This is a pattern. So Moses asking Pharaoh to let the people go. Pharaoh refuses. Moses causes a plague. Pharaoh begs him to stop it and the people can go home. Go. Finally, Pharaoh hardens the heart. So this pattern continues. And the two plagues that are included by the priestly writer, the nags and boils, when you study these two plagues, the role of Aaron. So it's not Moses who is the hero, Aaron the priest. So it is typical. The priestly writer gives importance to Aaron, Aaron the priest, rather than Moses the prophet. But whether it is the P writer or a JE tradition, every plague is a sign of God's power. Let's not bother too much about E writer, J writer, P writer. Don't worry. Every plague is a sign of God's power. God is in command. And it was so much felt in the psyche of Israel that Israel remembered many signs and wonders. So, plague is the means by which Yahweh punishes the unjust and the enemies of his people. This is what Bible tells us about the plague in general, not just the plague in Exodus. Plague in general is the means by which Yahweh punishes the unjust and the enemies of his people. Most of the plagues correspond to some natural phenomena known in ancient Egypt, because of which some scholars argue that the plagues are memories of some historical natural disaster or series of disasters. Some people don't believe that these events have taken place at all, no historical basis at all for some people. Now, let us look at the reality to answer the confusion. The narratives were written down several centuries later. They are not written down by a journalist as an eyewitness. They were written down several centuries later, and granting the power of memory, that there are many irregularities and inconsistencies. Some stories have a folklorist character, like in a story, like in a myth, especially the episode of the rod of Moses and Aaron, which magicians of Egypt also do. Magical power. They throw down the rod and the rod becomes snake. So too, Moses in chapter 5 and Aaron in chapter 7. So some of them have like a folklorish character. Also, when we hear or speak of miracles, people would like to hear about great events, extraordinary character of a miracle. There's a tendency to emphasize the miraculous aspect. But let me tell you, when you go through each of the plague, their writer often is sober. He does not add a lot of drama, unlike the priestly writer or even the e-writer. For example, he is very humble to say that the eighth plague, locust, is brought about by an east wind. So the east wind brought hundreds and thousands of locusts, and they came. They did their work, ate up all the greenery. Then there is a wind, the western wind, the wind from the west, and the locusts were driven out. So, the natural phenomenon. But for Israel, that natural phenomenon taking place at that moment was important. So this is a combination of J account, which is sober, and the E and P tradition that dramatize and heighten the miraculous aspect of the episode. Okay, before I conclude today's class, I will ask you to just get this into your heart. The plagues are signs and wonders. Sign is a, a pointer to a reality. Um, then the last phrase. I will begin next class from here. They believed that any event, ordinary or extraordinary, could be a sign of his will and activity. Any event, ordinary or extraordinary, could be a sign of God's will and activity. It is important that God does it. It is important to know whether it is a sober event or a miraculous event, it takes place at the correct time. And I will be highlighting and repeatedly using the phrase extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. The events narrated in the rest of the book of Exodus are extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. Ordinary events coming together at the correct time. That is why extraordinary concurrence of ordinary events. Okay, friends. for the coming days class, that's we will have on Saturday, I will explain plague by plague. Okay, till then, um, um, it may what I have said may appear as theories, but I wanted to say this to put to place a firm foundation so that the plagues will be understood in the correct perspective. Okay, we will take up the plagues one by one in the coming class. So please be prepared to go through this, encounter these plagues. Please read carefully from chapter 7, verse 14 till the end of chapter 10 and 11. 11 is the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, and we will take it up in the coming class. So there will be very, in fact, one after the other, the plagues come and the pattern is already dealt, so it will be much faster in the coming class. So I will stop now. I will wait for your
Yeah,
questions if there are, because some,
there are.
yeah, in fact, someone had already, two people have already sent the questions earlier. But let's take the questions now. Otherwise, the rest I will answer tomorrow.
So I think this must have been one of the most interesting classes. Even I remember when we studied theology, we had the this was one of the most interesting passages, and surely I'm sure all of you are going to really it's a real eye opener for all of us. But we'll begin quickly in Exodus chapter 5. Was Moses ever in a good relationship with the Hebrews since he grew up in that place?
Brother, could you repeat once again?
In Exodus chapter 5,
Yeah.
was Moses ever in a good relationship with the Hebrews since he also grew up in the palace? Since he grew up in the palace, was he ever in a good relationship with the Hebrews?
Yeah, with a big, well, um, very unlikely that Moses had any contact with the people of Israel when he grew up in the court. You know, he was brought up. He was brought up in the security of the Pharaoh's court. So in the beginning, he did not have. But throughout the 80 years, yes, of the so-called public life of Moses, in the 40 years with the Midianites, and later 40 years with the people of Israel, we find Moses as an enigmatic figure in the sense that the relationship is characterized by tension, grumbling. They will challenge and question even the authority of Moses. The relationship was always strained, or very often strained.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll quickly go to the next question. How did the writers come to know about genealogy for long period of years? How did the writers really know about the genealogy that is mentioned?
Yeah. Um, it was very often, handed down orally. You know, my father, my father's father, and my father's 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 father. But it is not all. See, um, our forefathers, our ancestors had much sharper memory than we have. You know? In fact, maybe 10 years ago, 50, or 20 years ago, we had much sharper memory than we have now. We used to remember maybe 20, 25, 50, 60 telephone numbers by heart. Now we will hardly know because the machines have taken control of many of our faculties. So it was important for and to have the identity of a group to show that I belong to this group and my father belonged to that group and his father was the son of so and so. So they would repeatedly um, um, repeatedly how do you call it, hand over the tradition. and not that the genealogy will be accurate. There will be mistake. That's why even look at the genealogy of Jesus given by Matthew and Luke. Chapter 1 of Matthew, chapter 4 of Luke. They're not exact. So there are differences in the genealogy and not very accurate. They believe they trusted very much on the memory and the oral tradition. Yes.
Okay. Next question quickly. Zechariah, father of John the Baptist, was a priest in the Holy of Holies. Was he a descendant of Aaron the Levite? How is then Jesus related to him? Is he a Levite? Yeah.
Yeah. You are asking me a question out of context, but all the same. See, it's that account is given by Luke, Gospel according to Luke. If we only have the Gospel of Matthew and Mark or John, we will never know the so-called relationship between John the Baptist and Jesus. It's in Luke, only in Luke's Gospel that we come to know that they are in a way cousins. So, anyway, if Zechariah was a priest serving in Jerusalem, he has to be from the family of Levi. In that case, is Jesus related in the Matthew's Gospel? He comes from the family of Judah through Joseph, So Abraham, David, Joseph. So it's very difficult to really say the relationship between the two, to reconcile the account in Luke and the account in Matthew.
Okay. We'll quickly go to the next one. uh, yeah. Okay. Did God talk to Moses in the same way he spoke to Adam and Eve as he walked in the garden with them? How was the idea of the conversation between Adam and was it that the conversation between with Moses the same as it was with
No,
Adam?
no. See, the first 11 chapters of Genesis are written in a different way, different narrative. Um, See, there the relationship, the narrator is presenting God very, very, very close to human being, like an anthropomorphic idea of God we have discussed. In the Exodus story is slightly different. There is a lot of mixing up of traditions also. Sometimes each tradition takes a prominence to show the transcendence of God. In any case, um, like Adam and Eve, or God speaking to Adam, or walking in the cool evening of garden, God doesn't do that in the Exodus. No, it's not.
Okay, the next one quickly. God is not contesting with other gods, but with a human being. So, with regard to Pharaoh. So, what is the point? God is always in control of everything. Then why does negative thing? Why suffering? In case of the plagues, if it came in this plagues, in this case, plagues came from God, from someone who is in control of everything. So here, God is not really contesting with someone equal, but it's someone below him. So how do we understand?
Bible doesn't want to leave any doubt in the mind of the reader that um, there is polytheism, that God is fighting with another God. No, there's only one God. For the Bible, there is only one God, and that is Yahweh God. But at the same time, this story of Exodus is so pivotal in the history of Israel that this has to be remembered for ages to come, generations to come. So it will take place through different plagues leading up to a very violent death of the firstborn. So we may not agree with the modern sensibility. We may not, it may be difficult to understand. At the same time, the ancients believed this way, and they have reason to highlight this process. Okay. Maybe as we come to the end of the plagues, it will be clearer and clearer.
Okay, I think it's getting a little late. There are just three more questions. Maybe we'll take those up in the beginning tomorrow. Will that be okay?
Yeah, I think it's already.
Yeah, it's almost time. So we'll take this three more questions. We'll take them up. I think on Saturday. So we'll conclude the class for today. So we thank you all for making. We thank Fashabu I mean, it's a Thursday again, so he shifted his timetable. So we thank him for it, and we'll see you all on Saturday with the next session. So thank you. We'll conclude. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.